Hello, and thanks so much for joining us today. You know, if you're from Texas, maybe Oklahoma, maybe Colorado, then you may have grown up celebrating Juneteenth, or you were at least aware of it. But a lot of folks didn't begin to celebrate Juneteenth until it became a federal holiday just a few years ago. My guests today say it is important that we all understand the meaning of Juneteenth, no matter what your ethnicity is or where you're from in the country. So let's start with Dr. Fred Parham. He is a professor at Clark Atlanta University. He teaches political science. And also joining the conversation today, we have Dr. Makungu Akinyela and his wife Chinganji Akinyela. They are community activists who say celebrating holidays like Juneteenth helps Black families understand their own identity and also helps others understand us, right?
Yes,
in this collective, beloved community space that we are in, understanding one another. Welcome to all of you. It's good to have you.
Thank you for having us.
So I've got to start with you.
Sure.
My native Texan, right?
That's right.
Grew up. You haven't ever not known a year where you were not celebrating. Explain. What was that like?
So I grew up in the shadow of an HBCU Bishop College, which is today Paul Quinn. And so I can remember going to junior achievement, you know, in middle school and summertime. And Juneteenth was a parade celebration. And we would get super excited as a family, mom and dad and my little brother, to go to this parade. And it was almost like we had two Independence Days, and I grew up in Dallas. And so Juneteenth was ours, and July 4th was the greater holiday or Independence Day. And so, you know, barbecues. And I think one unique feature of our celebration of Juneteenth in Texas was that we had rodeos. And trail rides.
Yes,
celebrating
so the Black
Juneteenth.
Cowboys.
Yes.
Isn't that part of our history as well?
Yes, ma'am.
So for the two of you, what did that look like growing up in California, right?
There was no Juneteenth in California.
No Juneteenth.
Never heard. So when did you all first hear about
When we
it?
moved to the South. We came to Georgia. That's when we began hearing
So you're
about
good and
Juneteenth.
grown at this point.
We're good and grown.
Right.
We're grown kids almost. No, not grown kids. But yeah, we were definitely grown. Came to the South. I hadn't heard of it, and people started talking about it. I said, Juneteenth? Well, it's a party. I'm there.
But you were both intentional about making sure that it was a party, but it was more than a party. So how did you learn and teach your children at the same time? Why did you feel like that was going to be a teachable moment?
Well, for us, even though we only began to hear about Juneteenth in a serious way once we came to the South, we've always, as a family, practiced and involved our family in African-centered celebrations and African-centered culture.
So I assume you were celebrating Kwanzaa.
Yeah,
You were celebrating
Kwanzaa, all those things, you know.
doing African naming
Umoja Karamu, naming ceremonies. And so this was just a natural fit. It made sense for us that, you know, it was an easy inclusion.
Can I ask you, were you like, how did we get this far and not? How was it, and why? And I'd like to bring you back into the conversation, Dr. Parham, because why was it just so concentrated in just a few, you know, states? I mean, I knew about it in Colorado because, you know, stones throw away from Oklahoma, stones throw away from Texas.
Absolutely.
But why was there not more conversation about it?
That's a great question. I remember traveling with my parents. They're both from Alabama and Florida. And, you know, during the 80s and early 90s, we're celebrating in Texas. So I'm going to Florida and Alabama, and it's true. No one knew. In fact, people knew more about the show Dallas than they knew about Juneteenth. And these was Black folk in my family in the community.
Right.
And, you know, I didn't think anything of it.
Yeah.
You know, I was a young man, and I ended up going to college in Texas, so I was in Houston. And so I really didn't experience folks not having knowledge about Juneteenth because I spent, you know, most of my young adulthood in Texas.
So let's talk about what was going on in 2018-19, right, when there was some conversation about making this a federal holiday, which we know it takes a lot for anything to become a federal holiday. There are only a few on the calendar for a reason. What happened that we got to a space where this became something that was just celebrated in a few spaces to a holiday?
Well, I think there was always this undercurrent of Juneteenth in the Texas delegation to the National Assembly. And then I think just the noise and connectivity via internet and social media also helped spread Juneteenth. And the government basically decided, in response to what went on in Minnesota, that this Juneteenth acknowledgement or lifting it up as a national holiday would help spread the African American culture and
I
history.
want to talk about that, and I want to bring you in here too, in your capacity as a professor, as a pastor, as community activist. When you're talking about what happened in Minnesota, we're talking about the acts of violence against unarmed Black men and women that sort of was really on the hearts and minds, especially in 2020. How did that end up shaping? How did that end up? Because policy ended up being changed because of just sort of the passion of what was happening in the streets. Help make that connection. Why were those two so connected?
I think that when Black people meet adversity, our culture is the real salvation for us, because through our culture, through our cultural practices, you talked about Kwanzaa, Umoja Karamu, naming ceremonies, whatever it is, that's what helps us to feel united and feel like a people. And so as those things were happening in Minnesota, and not just Minnesota, actually during that period of time all across the country, people grasped onto these things, which help us to know that we are a people who are united. And so those celebrations, those practices help us to feel like a people, that we have one culture, and it helps us to heal together.
Right.
So culture is important to healing.
So how do you celebrate now? What does that look like for your family and the larger community, right?
Yeah, I want to add to some of that, and I, address that as well. I think that there was a national mirror or photography or a camera on what was going on in the Black community and concern. And I really do think that one of the reasons that it went through so fast after years of trying to get it was to kind of, cool people down. Hey, we'll give y'all something. And what maybe was designated for bad, we take it for good because this is us. It's ours, And so we began to look at it as, let's celebrate ourselves. Let's celebrate how we got to that 13th Amendment. Let's celebrate how we were free. Let's celebrate that time. And anytime that we celebrate our accomplishments and our history, hey, we're already winning.
Right.
We're already winning.
So what does celebration look like for you? Give me an example. And how has it changed for you all? Oh, is this the wedding picture? No.
That's actually the 10th anniversary.
That was the 10th anniversary. Okay. I can tell because the beard is a little different color. But what does that look like for your family, for your children, and in a larger space, right?
Yeah, my daughter, Shimaranga, is the big one on, she's grown up with it. Juneteenth, we doing Juneteenth? We're going to have it's going to be a barbecue. She's going to find the red, black, and green flags, plates, napkins, signs. Cakes. And we're going to do something that talks about our people culturally. And that has meant that for us as
Is there
a
conversation
family,
too? I mean, it's fun, right?
Absolutely.
But I have to imagine in your space as educators and activists that there's a conversation. How do you make it interesting to little people, to college students? What's that look like?
So for me, I threw a party. I just brought Texas with me and created this concept called the Juneteenth Dashiki Party about 7 years before the national holiday. And so as...
and let's be honest, because sometimes the dashiki was the first thing that people embraced when they said, okay, I'm going to embrace what it looks like to wear African heritage. And it might not even be made in Africa, right? Let's just be honest. But it was that first label of, okay, I can connect to this, right?
Yes.
Explain.
Absolutely. And so what was it about? It was about having a great time, bringing all of our pain points from whatever, teaching what Juneteenth is to those who didn't know, and then transforming those pain points to joy and excitement, as he alluded to, and reasons to celebrate our togetherness. And
it's interesting, this concept of pain points. How do you, and then obviously in your capacity, not just as a pastor, but also a counselor, pain points to celebration? For folks who have a hard time putting those two together, what does that mean? What does that look like?
Talk about
Well, when he says that, it's sort of like, I think about the blues,
Yes,
right?
sir.
The blues is, out on the outside it's sad, but always on the inside it's something we holding on to something. You know, there's you know, even in some of the saddest blues, there's some irony and some little inside jokes in it, right? And so I think it's, you know, whether it's the blues, Black people's spirituals, right? So we can find something to celebrate even in the most painful points.
And you talk about some of these things in your book, right? Explain, tell me more.
The book is called Culture, Politics, Spirituality, and Practice. And we talk about the importance of culture. So for instance, I describe, for instance, for me, the first time returning to Africa and going through the slave dungeons.
May I ask, how old were you when you made the journey home?
That was
20-something?
Maybe, no.
Oh.
I had to be 40. Yeah.
Okay.
You know, but walking, you know, going through those slave dungeons, walking out what they call the door of no return, where was the last space that our ancestors saw before they left Africa, getting on those slave trips, but then turning around and walking back through. And I had a young tour guide, James Masur, who's now a professor at Rutgers, right? And he, as I walked back through that door, he said, "Welcome home," and just the release that it had for me.
That language right there.
Yeah.
We're going to pause right there because this conversation is going to continue. And when we return, you are going to meet Makungu Akinyela and her daughter, Nima. They are sharing why they think more young people should embrace and celebrate Juneteenth and other African-centered traditions, coming up right after the break. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I really want to thank you for season 3 of Portia. It's because of loyal viewers like you that we keep getting to share this daily dose of positivity all across the country. So just a reminder, I still need you to like, comment, and subscribe. And go ahead and tell your friends. You can catch us now in Orlando, in San Francisco, in Atlanta, and all across the country on Fox Soul. Tell your friends. We'll see you soon on Portia.